President Biden travels to New York City this afternoon ahead of his address to the United Nations General Assembly scheduled for tomorrow. During the high-stakes meetings, the war in Ukraine is certainly going to be front and center. But climate change and the global economy, including rising food prices and energy costs, will certainly be on the agenda as well. And joining me now to discuss it is NBC News White House correspondent Carol Lee from New York and Richard Haass, the president of the Council on Foreign Relations. Carol, to you first. The president forfeited his prime speaking spot today. Of course, he's traveling back from the Queen's funeral. What are we hearing is going to be sort of the main focus when he speaks before the world there in New York?
Well, Peter, what we're hearing from the president's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, who's briefing reporters as I speak on what the president intends to try to accomplish here in New York while attending the UN General Assembly, is that one of the main themes of the president's speech is going to be, of course, Ukraine. And one of the things that he's going to do is offer a firm rebuke, this is according to Jake Sullivan, of Russia's war in Ukraine and really attempt to try to rally the world to around continuing to show support for Ukraine and to unite against Russia, and to really call on them not to divert their attention as this conflict continues to drag on. Another thing, Peter, that you're going to hear from the president tomorrow is an emphasis on U.S. leadership, not just when it comes to Ukraine, but also the president will point out that the U.S. is trying to lead on things like economic issues, food security, and other things, and likely take a bit of a victory lap in terms of him believing that he has followed through on what he outlined that the U.S. would do in his first speech to the United Nations General Assembly last year, where he talked about that the U.S. would restore alliances and that it would defend friends and allies against adversaries who were trying to redraw their borders or otherwise come out aggressively against them. And so you'll hear those are the main sorts of themes that you're going to hear from the president, as well as other issues that are important to him, including climate change, Peter.
Yeah, for sure. Richard, let me ask you, it's notable that the leaders from China, India and Russia are not going to be there. Without them, how does that sort of change the messaging here? Obviously, an opportunity for the West to sort of unify on some of these issues, but how does that change this conversation?
Not a whole lot, because they're not members of the coalition, obviously, dealing with Russian aggression. So the president is speaking to the members of that coalition in Europe and beyond, or would-be countries or would-be members that could be more supportive of sanctions or more critical of Russia. He also needs to compensate for, I thought, the truly disappointing speech by the UN General Secretary, who barely mentioned the conflict in Ukraine, was not willing to criticize Russia, essentially punted. And if you ever needed a demonstration of why the UN lacks influence, you would have heard it this morning. I also think the president has an opportunity or a necessity to clear up some of the confusion about his comments on 60 Minutes about Taiwan. In particular, it's important to signal that the United States is not comfortable with the idea or accepting the idea of Taiwan declaring independence. We should make clear, and I hope the president does this, that he opposes unilateral actions, be it by the mainland or by Taiwan.
Let me ask you, if I can, that Taiwan issue obviously is going to make some news no matter what the president says on it. I want to ask you about what we've witnessed in Ukraine over the course of the last couple of weeks. A lot of the world's attention was distracted by the funeral for the Queen there. But, of course, hundreds of bodies have been retrieved, including those of children, from a mass grave in Ukraine, one of 20 towns and cities, Izium, I think, that had been liberated during this Ukrainian counteroffensive. Many of the bodies showed signs of torture. How do you address this at the United Nations? I mean, the atrocities just continue to grow, Richard.
Absolutely. I was in Ukraine last week. I went to Bucha, where there's now a memorial to the atrocities. It has hardened the views in Ukraine. The war aims in Ukraine, if you will, have gone up, in part because of these atrocities and the brutality, in part because of their recent military gains. But I think the president needs to highlight this and basically say we're dealing with Russian aggression, we're dealing with Russian atrocities, and this is why the world can't give Putin any quarter. We need a United Nations, if you will. If there was ever a moment this organization would prove its worth, that it was committed to its own founding principles, this is the moment. The president ought to challenge the world to act like the international community it says it is, but rarely is.
Let me ask you, Richard, you wrote in an article for Project Syndicate that we're not only facing this winter of discontent in Ukraine, but also of decision. What do you mean by that?
Well, the question is, do you continue on the current trajectory? What war aims do you meet? For Ukraine, for Russia, is Mr. Putin ever going to be willing to define success down and compromise? Ukraine has to decide whether to press ahead, demanding every square inch of territory be liberated. Perhaps the most important decisions, though, will have to be made in Europe. Do they stay the course despite the problems that are going to be caused by energy shortages, by Russian pressure, by their economic difficulties? So I think the most interesting decisions this winter are going to be made by the European countries. Are they prepared to stand by Ukraine against Russian aggression? That will be the critical thing to look for.
Among the president's key meetings when he gets to New York, a visit with Liz Truss, the new prime minister of the United Kingdom, Richard Haass, Carol Lee. We appreciate both of you being here.